Welcome to First Unitarian Society of Minneapolis, the birthplace of Congregational Humanism. We carry on that tradition of free thought today, dedicated to promoting a free search for truth, meaning, and justice. Our web address is firstunitarian.org. I'm David Breeden, Senior Minister. Welcome. Well, a recent United Nations policy brief titled, now wait for it, this is written by a committee, so you're ready for the title, Mending the Broken Relationship with Nature, Tackling the Biodiversity, Ecosystems, Health, and Climate Change Nexus Post-COVID-19. End of title. And the quote is this: what are the concrete policy actions that can be implemented to mend the broken relationship between human societies and the environment and address at the same time the global biodiversity, climate, and health crisis? End quote. All right, well, yeah, even that's not great English. It's unfair to be all that critical of the writing that does occur in a bureaucracy, of course. Who knows how many people had to vote on that? Still, notice the assumption built into the document. The assumption to mend the broken relationship between human societies and the environment. Now reflect for a moment how far back in time that breakage in that relationship goes. And also reflect, isn't it convenient for rich Western societies to dissolve responsibility into something we're going to call human societies in general, rather than taking our own responsibility? Isn't one of the aspects of indigenous cultures that Westerners admire, or we at least pay lip service to admiring, that they do not have a broken relationship with the environment? And let me give you a for instance. I know that many of you have heard my stories of my family farm. Now, I want to tell you how that got to be what it is today. That land had been stolen from the Shawnee Indians when, in 1830, they were driven west of the Mississippi River to eventually settle on a reservation in Oklahoma, where they are today. The last vestiges of Native activity ended in Illinois in 1832 with the so-called Black Hawk War, which was actually a massacre by white people, the Illinois militia specifically. Euro-Americans, such as my family, had been moving into the southern part of Illinois from North Carolina, Tennessee, and Kentucky. This was illegal immigration, even though it was a wink, wink, nod, nod in terms of whites moving into Indian land. It was made legal in 1841 by something called the Preemption Act. It's land sold to Euro-Americans at $1.25 an acre, which, yeah, that sounds cheap, but even today that would be $36 an acre. Now, be reminded that the U.S. government did not have a personal income tax until we ran out of Indian land to sell around the First World War period. So this was one of the few revenue streams for the federal government in the 19th century. The Preemption Act required that the purchaser be a head of household, over 21, a male or a widow. Now, I like that if you stop to think about it. I guess because you've been married to a man, somehow a woman's place is elevated. You've been taught a lesson or something. I don't know. But that was the legal language of the time. You had to be a male or a widow, also a U.S. citizen or an immigrant who promised to become a U.S. citizen, and the purchaser had to live on the land at least 6 months before the purchase, and they had to improve the land, which, of course, is the rub. That is where the broken relationship between human societies and the environment entered into my farm that I have today. As you might expect, improvement meant European-style farming. You had to build a house and outbuildings, and you had to cooperate in building roads. In my childhood, stories of the indigenous peoples were very common. We knew the hill where the winter village of a group of Shawnee had lived. The Shawnee were semi-nomadic people. They grew crops in the warm months in one particular village, and then in the winter they would hunt in another particular village. And we found arrowheads in the ditches that had been washed up by the floods quite often when I was a kid. Now, when I was a kid and I would ask, well, where did these people go? The answer was, oh, they disappeared, which, needless to say, was a bit of an exaggeration. All of us come from a geography. The picture here this morning, that's my geography. It's the hills of southern Illinois, look much like Kentucky and North Carolina and Tennessee, hardwood forests and very, very poor land to farm, actually. In my personal imaginary, improvement of the land was the first mistake in that area. It was improvement that broke the relationship between human societies and the environment. The advent of industrialized agriculture in my own lifetime only accelerated the damage and the breakage. And occasionally I do go back and visit those old folks in the family cemetery. Well, what did this breaking? How did this breaking occur? Well, it was by people like my family who were driven by an extremely bad idea. To distinguish between emotions and ideas for a moment, emotions, you feel it and you get over it or you don't. I mean, it can be bad, your emotions, but you get over it. It's temporary. An idea, however, can last for generations or even millennia. It was the idea, the mental construct of what is known as dualism, right? Dualism, the belief that there are two elements of reality in our cosmos. The material one, in which we have, empirical studies. Yes, there's gravity, that's what it does. And the spiritual, which is a different kind of cosmos that we can only reach through emotion and belief and particular religious practices. You have to do it this way, religions will tell you. In this dualistic scenario, the material world, the measurable cosmos, becomes something to be improved upon. God improved upon chaos, after all, so why can't we farmers improve upon this nasty bit of yellow clay that we have? Well, where does this dualism come from? Well, it's articulated in the book of Genesis, which, of course, permeates Christianized societies. By the way, I do want you to notice how few people actually read these stories, even though they are absolutely essential in our society itself. Lifeways, which is a Christian media company, reveals that only 9% of Americans have read all of the Bible, more than once. Now, I happen to be in that category because I was a good Sunday school kid when I was young. Now, on the other side of that, 10% have read none of it, and 13% only a few sentences. I don't know how you do that. I guess it used, in the old Gideon Bibles days. Only about half of Americans, in other words, have actually read very much of the Bible. But we are saturated with the stories in it, even if we have not read it. The Genesis story sets up a dualism essentially between us, those that are possessed by a soul, which is immaterial, and things. They do become things, those things that don't have a soul. The duality is made explicit as God talks with Adam and Eve. And I'll read you a few sentences of the Bible. Here goes. He's kicking them out of the Garden of Eden. He says, "And God blessed them, and God said unto them, Be fruitful and multiply, and replenish the earth, and subdue it, and have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the fowl of the air, and over every living thing that moveth upon the earth." Well, that's not ambiguous, is it? You get this, go take care of it. Improve it. Now, I remember asking my mother why it was okay for us to kill animals when I was a kid, but it wasn't okay to kill people. Well, her answer was because animals don't have souls. Now, that is obviously exactly the belief system that my family had carried into the wilderness in order to subdue and improve it. All of that doesn't have a soul. The relationship between our society and the environment was broken, well, millennia before, back when we were in Europe somewhere. All of this is based on a fanciful and erroneous idea about there being two kinds of reality. The assumption of two realities, a spiritual one and a material one, became foundational to the European Christian mind and hardened into a story of why the majority of Europeans needed to be subjugated to the church and to the particular monarch of that area. It was called the Great Chain of Being, and it postulated a pure God, pure spirit up at the top, and rocks and stones down at the bottom. And we, poor souls, being soil-like in some ways, we're halfway in between. Between, in this mapping of reality, well, that's why the kings have to rule you. That's why you have to listen to the priests. You have to listen, and they will tell you to improve the world and feed us, the animals. Subdue the earth and take dominion over it. God approves, the king approves, and you, dear European peasant, have no choice in participating in this because God says you must. Well, there's only one little problem with this great chain of being. It's not true. It's the biggest lie ever, I would say, that human beings ever perpetrated. This misunderstanding of reality has robbed billions of people through the generations of having flourishing lives. And it's plundered the earth's resources. It's driven many species to extinction already. And now, surprise, surprise, we face extinction ourselves. A broken relationship, the UN calls it. Yeah, that's a pernicious idea. Now, I do want to be sure you hear me. I'm not saying that human beings do not have experiences that we call spiritual. Of course we do. It's merely that in the ancient world, many people, including the Hebrews and the Greeks and the Persians, mistakenly divided reality between a material and a spiritual world, and the spiritual was the good one and the material was the bad one. The Shawnee people, my family ran off, did not have that mistaken view of reality. The old language is fine for what it does, but we today must realize that spirit, soul, is our human consciousness, and lots of animals also have consciousness, and maybe even the plants. And, well, the Shawnee thought that the trees and the rocks did as well. The Sinhalese conservationist Baba Diyum puts it this way. He says, in the end, we will conserve only what we love. We will love only what we understand, and we will understand only what we are taught. Now, my mother was taught that animals do not have souls. Trees don't have souls. The earth doesn't have a soul, she was taught. This was a malevolent teaching. We can perhaps say it was inadvertently malevolent by the Christian church, but the result is the same, widespread destruction. It was the teaching of the monotheisms as they stamped out the much older human understandings of nature as alive and deserving of our reverence. Dualism was the teaching forced upon the peasants of Europe by Christian missionaries. And as my old teacher, the novelist William Burroughs, phrased it, the one God universe where there is no magic aside from dictated magic. No magic aside from what the church says is magic, in other words. And then Burroughs contrasted this with the many-God universe where possibilities are everywhere and endless. One God, no possibility. He's already figured it all out. Many gods? Kind of fun. Lots of possibility. Well, I like to see a world of possibility. Unfortunately, it drove my old teacher Burroughs to great paranoia to think that this world was essentially a chaos of gods around us. But I think that's kind of cool, actually. Many conventionally religious people, when they consider us unconventionally religious people and us not religious people, will start with what I've referred to as before as the ain't gots, as in, well, you ain't got a God. You ain't got on wonder then. How can you have any reverence because you ain't got. And of course, you ain't got no morality or ethics either. Well, that seems a bit odd to me. This is the same move that Christian missionaries made as they attempted to conquer the world, telling people with religions other than Christianity, well, you ain't got a heaven to go to, so you got a problem. You ain't got anything sacred in your life. You ain't got plans to improve the planet, so we get to shoot you because God wants us to do this. Well, that's one way of seeing the world. The tragic Western mistake of dualism originates from a simple misunderstanding of reality. If you wish to be scientific about it, here are the words of biologist Ursula Goodenough. She says, "Life from non-life, like wine from water, has long been considered a miracle wrought by gods or God. Now it is seen to be the near inevitable consequence of our thermal and chemical circumstances," end quote. Now, I suppose that beginning the book of Genesis with, "in the beginning," as a product of our near inevitable consequence of our thermal and chemical circumstances, you can see how that would not be a bestseller. Well, her book was a bestseller, actually. But as I've said before, naked people and snakes and flaming swords are a whole lot better if you want to really tell a fine story. But science tells us a very different kind of story. I'll get back to Ursula Goodenough in a bit, but her entire life was spent figuring out this tiny difference between what we call plant and animal, and that some plants become animals as they mature. Some of you were here when Jacob Mullis, thanks for singing today, Jacob, beautiful stuff. When Jacob and I talked with author and podcaster J.F. Martell, he's the co-director of a podcast called Weird Studies, which I highly recommend, the podcast. If you enjoy weird stuff, as I do, you can do a little web search on that. In a recent podcast, the hosts considered a book called Technic and Magic, The Reconstruction of Reality, and this is by the Italian philosopher Federico Campagna, a young Italian philosopher who lives in London. To quickly summarize an extremely complex book, I don't recommend it if you're not totally into reading continental philosophy, right? But there's some great YouTube stuff that he's done online that you can find. But in this book, Campagna begins by saying we all live in a worldview that we experience as reality. I think this is a given. You get up every day, hi, self, and you live through a day that you recognize. This is your reality. This system is passively, for most of us anyway, passively imposed and absorbed. And this becomes a hegemonic cultural system. Most of us accept a reality system with little in the way of questioning, at least in the larger brushstrokes. This is reality. It's what I've learned in school. It's what my family taught me, etc. Now, as I've been saying, the default system in the Western world is this Christian dualistic reality system, right? Dr. Campagna calls this reality technic, T-E-C-H-N-I-C. Yes, it's misspelled, even in Italian, technic. But you get the idea. This is the world we live in, a technologically induced world where there is us and them, subject and object, a reality in which everything can be measured and everything can be improved and used. This is the I-it world, if you know Martin Buber's work. I-it. It's me, and then everything else is a thing. Now, magic is another system. This is the one that he's talking about us adopting. It's a system of seeing reality. Magic is the I-thou world in which reality is all wrapped together. Everything in reality becomes part of me and part of my circle of care. The secular naturalistic reality system, technic, spirit and material world are only artificially separated in the magic world, he claims. So it is that Ursula Goodenough, who popularized the concept of religious naturalism that we talk quite a bit, she had a best-selling book called The Sacred Depths of Nature, and she says the most reliable joy is to be out of doors, to be a creature among creatures, to be a creature among creatures. Religious naturalism is one way that Westerners can escape the dominant paradigm of Christian thought. And it's a way of going about reaccessing the awe and the feeling that the world and the self and the material world and the spiritual world are all one and the same and accessible to me right here, right now. What is being called religious naturalism merely means pursuing naturalism in a religious way. That is, in a way of wonder and awe. Now, by the way, you heard it here first. If things work out, I've mentioned the men's lectures, and I'm going to be doing one more. Jay Hooper is going to be joining me, and Ursula Goodenough is thinking about joining us in that discussion. So we'll see if that happens at the General Assembly in June. Critics of a naturalistic worldview often insist that awe and wonder are lacking in our non-theistic perspectives. It's something we ain't got. Clearly, they haven't asked us humanists and naturalists about that. If you want wonder in your life this afternoon, do a web search on couch and stuck. And I promise you that you will be left wondering. Couch and stuck. It's pretty amazing what human beings can do with couches and being stuck. But that's wonder, all right? That's wonder. You can get it from the back of a cereal box. But awe is a little bit different. It's so easy to feel that we go through our lives somehow untouched by the reality around us. That's old cultural conditioning telling us a lie. Your essence, your soul, you're not your body, this old programming tells us. You're going through life to go on to that higher reward that is a spiritual existence in the great chain of being. Again, I believe that is a lie. It's a lie that we are not untouched by and entangled in all that is. So, if you want some awe in your life, I say, try magic. And that is the other half of what our philosopher has been talking about. So, you can go buy magic cards. There's a card game called Magic, and some people get into levitating and demons and that kind of thing when you start talking about magic, but that's not real magic. Magic is about consciously using your mind to rewrite the stories in your head that tell you you are separate from the cosmos. That's the big lie. Rather, we are inextricably intertwined with all the rest of nature, and we're enmeshed in all that is. Perhaps ask yourself, who broke my relationship with nature? Sometime you're meditating at home. Who broke my relationship with nature? Who told me that I wasn't part and parcel of everything? Who told me I had to go to a particular church to have a spiritual life? Who told me? And what am I going to do about that? Perhaps try to mend that broken relationship between the human and the environment. Our technology will not save us from our current situation, but our hearts and our minds might. I want to leave you with a quote from the Stoic philosopher and Roman Emperor Marcus Aurelius. As you know, I really like his work. I see the Christianity that stamped out his way of thinking as a misstep in European thought. He had this to say: Things coming into existence are not merely a string of things, but a wondrous series of relationships. A wondrous series of relationships. That is awe for you, and that's where the magic is. Thanks for listening. You can find much more about humanism and what's happening at First Unitarian Society in Minneapolis by visiting our website at firstunitarian.org.